Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. My name is John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Today, our guest is Leah Sokolowsky. Leah is one of the top location managers and scouts in Florida and is a member of the Teamsters Local 769. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today, Leah.
Thank you for having me, John.
So I like to start each one of these interviews with a little bit of backstory. So tell us how you got your start in the industry.
So my story is a little bit long and convoluted. I grew up basically in the 70s and 80s when all of these great movies were coming out, like Star Wars and Jaws and E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And they were all about amazing visual effects paired with amazing stories. And they just sucked me in. And I was constantly at the movies every weekend, twice a weekend, 3 times a weekend, seeing movies over and over and over again. Coupled with that fact was my father was in advertising. He was a creative director for a large advertising agency in Dallas called Bloom. Long story short, my parents unfortunately divorced and we moved away. But the good part was when I would go visit my father, he would take me on location for the commercials that he was producing. So he would take me to New York, he would take me to Los Angeles, he would take me to Chicago, and I would get to visit these sets. And when I was about 13, I went to, it was an American milk producers commercial that was being shot at a ranch out in Los Angeles. And while we were there, they were actually filming the popular TV show, The A-Team, with Mr. T. And I got to meet Mr. T. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And not only did I get to meet Mr. T, but I got to sit on the set and watch them do what they were doing. And I just fell in love. And from that point on, I just knew that in some form, some way, somehow, I wanted to be involved in making motion pictures. And that was really it.
So how did you get your start as a location manager?
Well, I went to film school at the University of Texas at Austin. And when I graduated, I came back to South Florida because Miami Vice had actually just wrapped production, and there was a lot of stuff going on. I lived actually in Palm Beach County at the time and didn't have any friends or family in the business, so my stepfather noticed in the Palm Beach Post that there was an opening for an intern at the Palm Beach County Film Commission. So I called and went down there and met Chuck Eldred, and he somehow decided that I was suited for this internship and started working for him. And one day, a very prominent location manager who had worked on Miami Vice came into the office. She was pulling a permit for, I think it was the Montreal Expos, to use the West Palm Beach baseball stadium. And she needed somebody to work as a PA who knew how to use a Macintosh computer. Yes, this is a while ago. And I was that person. And so she hired me on the spot. And we just really clicked and got along very, very well. And basically, she referred me to some other people. And then when an opportunity came, she recruited me to be on her team as basically a trainee scout, our location manager C position in our union. She trained me for many, many years. And I worked with her on many, many projects. And she really launched my career.
At some point in your career, you went from being a typical industry professional doing locations to being one of the top location managers in the state of Florida. Was there one moment when that happened, or was it a gradual thing that got you to that point?
Well, first, let me point out that those were your words, not mine. Definitely my rise in my profession has been gradual. As I mentioned, I started under one really phenomenal location manager, and I've had the pleasure and opportunity to train under most of the top location managers in this state and to work with many of the top location managers in this country. I've been blessed to work on many projects throughout my career, some big, some very, very small, and this has given me the ability to quickly assess the needs of each project, budgetarily, personnel-wise. It gives me the ability to know instinctually what a project needs, no matter where it fits on the spectrum of projects. And I think this has allowed people to develop a trust in me and has allowed my name to kind of get around as somebody who can be trusted with projects big and small. And that over a period of years, decades, has led me to be somebody who works consistently, which is really nice. I've been able to make a professional career out of this industry, and that's something I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do when I started here in Florida.
And besides being a location manager, you also do a number of things in the industry. Talk about what other roles that you play.
Well, recently I've been working a little bit more as what some people would call a location fixer, which is kind of a cross between a location manager and a producer or production manager. It just basically opens up the job description of location manager, and it allows me to reach out to other people. Sometimes it's to coordinate interviews and behind-the-scenes footage and help with arranging that. Sometimes it's to act in more of a producing role to make bigger overall deals with hotels that may be serving a dual purpose, like it might be housing crew and serving as our main location for filming. It might just be working on little things that are going haywire behind the scenes that have nothing to do with production and trying to figure out ways to make them not impact production. So that's kind of fun because I get to stretch my wings and do some things that aren't traditionally, in the location sphere and get a little bit more experience. I've also been taking on some small projects as a production supervisor, which, allows me to basically hire crew and deal with equipment and spread my wings that way, deal a little bit more with budgeting and scheduling and things of that nature, which are somewhat part of my milieu in locations, but more ancillary versus my primary responsibility. So it's kind of nice to shift and to learn a little bit more about the production side of things. Recently, as you're aware, we've had a change in the types of productions that are coming to our state. So I've also been very fortunate to get a large client that has hired me to arrange basically site tours and visits. It's a digital media company, and I've signed an NDA, so I can't disclose who it is, but they've been exploring various areas of our state and of other states in the Southeast, and I've been planning and arranging those visits for their personnel, and that's been kind of a very interesting expansion of what I normally do as well. Over the past couple of years, I've really kind of looked at my career, and because we have experienced a change here in Florida, I've been kind of asking myself internally, what is it that I want to do as we're going through these changing times? Where do I see myself in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road? And so I'm really trying to stretch my wings and get more experience in the producing sphere. And that gives me great pleasure. There's a lot of talent here in the state, and my passion is really about developing projects that will be Florida projects produced by Florida people with Florida money. So I'm trying to get to a point where I can make that happen more consistently for myself and for, the many talented people here in our state. Then there's all the stuff that I've been involved in with Film Florida over the years with advocacy and trying to make sure that our industry continues to grow and thrive here in Florida, making sure people understand that our industry creates high-wage, high-tech jobs for the future, that they are more trades-type jobs that don't necessarily need a 4-year degree, that they're clean, that they're green, that, we spread money all around to many different people throughout many different communities, that we promote our way of life, we promote our stories, all that good stuff.
Leah, you mentioned Film Florida, and within the organization, you represent the Teamsters, Local 769. So talk about 769 for those that aren't familiar with them.
Teamsters 769 is obviously the local affiliate of the national Teamsters. And Teamsters, for those who are unaware, are North America's strongest and most diverse union. Teamsters, over the past 100 years, have worked to organize workers in almost every occupation imaginable. We're in both the professional and non-professional arenas. We're in the private sector. We're in the public sector. My union, 769, represents our film drivers and location managers and scouts in the film and entertainment sector of our industry. And basically, that follows the example set by Teamsters Local 399 out in LA. That was how we came to be represented under the Teamsters banner here in South Florida. In a nutshell, the basic purpose of the Teamsters Union and of unions in general is to put workers on even footing with large corporations and larger entities when we're negotiating things like wages and safety and professional standards and much, much more. What my union does for me is they set a floor for my wages, not a ceiling. I can negotiate on my own above scale. I can do lots of things, but they just set a minimum floor, a standard for the professional work that me and my fellow location managers and scouts do. In addition, they also make sure that we have monies that are paid to us for every day that we work, which goes into a healthcare fund and a pension fund. And this is, amazingly helpful when you work freelance or as a contract employee like we do. When you have a savings account that's put away for you and you can't touch it, and you're not working for a corporation that's doing that for you, it ensures that you're basically not a burden on the general public if you're not working. My health insurance continues. I will have a pension when I'm ready to retire. All of that stuff is really good. In addition, they make sure that the places that we work are safe, and they make sure that the standards that are set are reasonable. And all of that stuff is really, really good stuff. In fact, I don't really see much of a downside to being a member of a union when unions are working well.
Well, and as you know, organized labor is a polarizing topic these days. So talk about some of the misconceptions that people have about unions and how you work to dispel those misconceptions.
Oh, misconceptions. There's probably 4 basic misconceptions about unions, I would say. The first is that all union workers are lazy and entitled. The second one is that all union members lean to the left and, must be more communist or socialist in their political beliefs. The other one is that, unions are purely political organizations working to dictate our political beliefs and our systems. And the last one is that unions cost too much and that they hurt businesses in general. And I'll start with the first one, that union workers are lazy and entitled. And all I tell people when I hear things like that coming out of their mouths is come visit me on a movie set. Come and take a look at what we do. My drivers are driving huge rigs and taking care of them all day long, sometimes 14, 16 hours a day, sometimes moving them 2 to 3 times a day, helping load and unload them. My location managers are running around all day long from start to finish. And even if it's just not the movie sets, if you look at our brothers and sisters that work at UPS, lifting and hauling and delivering boxes day in and day out, some big, some small, on their feet, running around, it's not easy work. Not that it's the worst work in the world either, mind you, but union workers in general that I know are some of the hardest working, most honest people that I know. They want a good day's pay for a good day's work. The next issue that all union members lean left in their political beliefs, when you're in a group of people where there's hundreds, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people, you're never going to have a homogenous group of people. Florida, we all know, is very diverse in its political beliefs, and so is our union. We have members that cross the spectrum of who they like, what they believe in. And quite frankly, none of them are going to let anybody tell them what to believe. They're all learning on their own, and they're all forming their own beliefs. And just like any society, that creates a really amazing dynamic and a really good dynamic. So that misconception is probably the one I work hardest to dispel, because it's the one that actually kind of affects us the most here in this state when it comes to representing Teamsters. People always think, oh, well, you guys, you must be Democrats. You must lean left. No, that's not the case all the time. You don't know how I vote. You don't know how I feel. And I don't know how you do. Please don't assume. And that's what I tell people. I don't assume what my neighbors think. I don't assume what my colleagues think. please don't ever assume that we're one homogenous group of people who just thinks a certain way. The other thing is that unions are purely political organizations, and this just kind of makes me laugh because really the politics is kind of secondary. Really, the biggest service that the unions give us is negotiating our wages and our work conditions, and it's our collective bargaining contracts and agreements, and they spend so much time protecting those agreements and enforcing those agreements because it's important. Safety and wages are very important. The politics is really secondary. And honestly, I don't know much about how things operated, before I came to be a Teamster, and really before I came to be involved in Teamsters, really within the past probably decade. But a lot of the politics seems to be driven by necessity, by the constant attacks and backlash that unions receive, rather than driven by a political agenda, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't. Again, our members are diverse, so our unions aren't really necessarily driving a political agenda except to represent us. And I don't think that fighting for decent wages and fighting for health care and pension and fighting for safety standards is a partisan issue. It's really pretty bipartisan, so I think all of that union bashing is really to serve a political purpose from another side. And then the last thing is that unions cost too much and hurt businesses in general. And I kind of have to laugh at that because really my experience has been that union workers actually save businesses money because of our expertise. I know if I'm hired on as a location manager versus a non-union person who may not have my experience, I can save a production usually 10% of a budget, just as a kind of a guideline from a blanket budget that they give me just by looking at things creatively if they don't tie my hands, right? Sometimes you can't because there's creative issues and you can't negotiate or navigate around them. But if it's just, we have a finite source of money and this is what you get, this is your piece, and we're willing to take your suggestions, I can typically save that production at least 10% of what they have budgeted just by creative thinking and my experience. And my experience with union members is that they are all professionals that are well-trained, experienced, and know their craft. And most unions across the board, Teamsters, IA, DGA, PGA, WGA, whatever it is, most union members take pride in their profession, and I would say could probably have put to the test do similar things because of the training and the support and the years of experience and the process that you have to go through to get to that point. If you're a union member, typically it means that you know what you're doing, you're professional, and you can carry yourself in a certain manner and work with businesses in a certain manner to get a project done, at least in our industry.
So if someone wanted to get more involved with the Teamsters, what do they do?
The biggest thing that I can speak to, obviously, is getting involved as a locations person within Teamsters, specifically 769. Each Teamsters local, each affiliate probably has different ways of doing things. So if you want to get into locations, typically what people do is they will approach a union location manager and try to work as a PA. And we have a process where after working X amount of days as a PA, for a couple of different location managers, you can then basically get people to sign off to get you into the union, that you are a good candidate, that you are training, that you know certain people to call, certain procedures, certain safety issues, blah, 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 that you've, basically been given the knowledge to work as an effective locations person on set. So that would be the first thing I would say, would be, talk to somebody who's in the position that you hope to be in and ask if there's a training program, an apprenticeship, a way to figure out how to get involved in that area of work. The second thing that I would recommend would be we have public events, like we have an annual picnic. Find out about those annual picnics because usually they're really fun. We have old cars and fire engines, and usually it's a very family-oriented thing. So there's food and there's bounce houses, and every Teamster is represented there, so you can find out what it's like to be a UPS worker. You can find out what it's like to be in the public sector and be a Teamster. You can find out what it's like to be in the movie industry and be a Teamster. Those kinds of events are really amazing. I mean, they're meant more as family events for our union, but they are open to the public for a small fee traditionally. And they're great ways to get to know the people that the Teamsters are and what we do.
Leah, you were president of Film Florida from 2012 to 2014. Talk a little bit about your time as president.
My time as president was amazing and invigorating and phenomenal. I came up in the ranks of Film Florida by being very active in the legislating committee. Basically, while I was chair of the legislative committee, got our incentive program. And that was really, really exciting. And when I came in as president of Film Florida, the incentive, I think, had been in effect for, 2 years.
Right.
And we had gotten the original incentive, and then we actually got an additional year and more money put onto the incentive the second year, the year before I became president. And the year that I became president, we wanted to continue that, and we were looking to extend the incentive. We were looking for our legislators to commit to not letting it sunset and to continuing the program. That was our big push. And we had tremendous cooperation throughout the industry, union, non-union, corporate, small business, crew members, organizations, film commissions, educational facilities, unions, everything. We were all really very aligned and working not perfectly together, but quite well together at that point. And in an effort to show our legislators exactly what the industry was statewide, we actually did these expos throughout the state. I think we did 4 of them, and had key industry stakeholders show up and talk to legislators in various formats, and it was just really, really phenomenal. I got to see firsthand the tremendous industry resources that we have here in the state of Florida for our industry. I always kind of knew it to speak it, but then when you see the people and the businesses that they represent and the corporations and the people that represent them all together in a room, and they're all sitting there kind of saying the same thing and wanting the same thing, it's really inspirational. It's really just amazing. So first it showed me that we have these amazing resources for our industry here in the state, and they're statewide. And then it really ignited this passion in me for economic development. It really made me see very clearly how important it is that we diversify our economy here in this state. And I saw very clearly and very vividly that our industry can play a huge part in that diversification. And that just got me excited. So I think the 2 years, I was just kind of on this almost adrenaline high, for lack of a better word, just because I was just so passionate about it. I just so fervently believed that we could be part of this solution to diversifying our economy here in this state. It was right there. It seemed like an achievable goal. And then the other thing that my time as Film Florida president gave me was this tremendous faith in our democracy, to tell you the truth, John. Prior to my experience with Film Florida, I'd never really engaged at all with legislators. Never really had engaged locally, never really engaged on a statewide level, definitely not on a national level. And when I served as president and as legislative chair, that was part of my daily routine, was engaging with legislators and talking to them about my industry. And it astounded me that they were so accessible. I couldn't believe that I could actually get a hold of my legislators or their legislative aides, so quickly and easily. And quite frankly, not just my legislators, but legislators in leadership, legislators in other areas that are industry affected. It was really inspirational, and it's really fired up a desire in me to continue to be engaged, not just on behalf of my industry, but just in general, seeing that it is so easy if you just try to talk to the people who represent you. They may not always listen, and that's the other thing it did. It opened my eyes to the sausage-making process that is, legislating. Just because you go and meet with somebody and you talk to them and you make a case, and it sounds, like they're going to go with you and they're going to be in your corner and they're going to help you and they're going to fight with you, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the truth. And that's sometimes a little disconcerting. But the fact that you can engage in this conversation and be a part of educating our public servants on behalf of, an industry, on behalf of an issue, it really is pretty amazing. And I don't think we, as citizens of this country, realize just how easy and important it truly is. And that, I think, was the biggest learning experience for me as president, besides, of course, just stepping out in front of people. I'm a pretty private person, and I kind of got involved in Film Florida because I wanted to push myself to network in the industry outside of my comfort zone. I thought it would be a good thing. I thought, it would take me out of my shell. And I'm grateful for that experience, but wow, I certainly realized I like being behind the scenes so much better than I do in the spotlight. And it gave me a tremendous amount of respect for people like our public servants, like our legislators, who do put themselves in front of people and try to represent us. It's tough. Even, when you're representing a nonprofit organization, it's tough to reconcile the wants, the needs, the ideas of a group of people who are not homogenous. That was a tremendous experience for me. The support that I received from members of the industry, from members of our organization, I'll never forget that. It was, people were so helpful and really just gracious, kind, supportive. The people that we worked with, to advance our initiatives were collaborative, professional, helpful. It was a time period that I look back on quite fondly. And I'm very happy to have been a part of the organization. I think I've moved the football a little bit further ahead. But wow, I'm kind of glad it's over too. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Well, that was when I met you, because I don't know if you know this, but the Legislative Forum in Central Florida was the first time I really kind of got engaged and got involved myself. And it was all because some people here locally asked for some volunteers to help check people in. And that was really my job for the day. But then towards the end of the day, I was able to go next door and listen to the conversation. And that inspired me to get involved. So these years later, that was kind of the beginning of my involvement with Film Florida, was the Legislative Forum. So I'm thankful that you did them for that respect.
I remember that so well, John, because I remember you being so committed, and I remember you were there with Sheena.
Yes.
I remember saying to Sheena, "Oh my God, thank God for John Lux, because we wouldn't have been able to do this without." I mean, that was a big event. What did we have? Like 20 some odd legislators, and Jesse Panuccio was there from DEO, and that was the one that we actually used and we edited and used to put out our big push during the legislative session. It was so great. We couldn't have done it without you, and I'm so glad that ignited a spark, because now we have you, and you're ours, and you're representing our industry so well, and I couldn't be more thankful.
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, to speak to your point of how accessible some of the legislators were, the first thing I did after that forum was reach out to all the legislators that attended and thank them for attending and ask if I could get a meeting. And I will never forget Senator Alan Hayes immediately responded and said, "Sure, I can meet with you next week." And I was like, "What?" This is, I wasn't expecting that to happen. And within, 2 or 3 months, I had 10, 12 meetings with different legislators and started learning more about the process myself. And so, yeah, you're right that it's amazing how accessible and how willing they are to engage, even if they disagree with you. In most cases, they'll still take your meeting and talk to you and allow you to learn, and they'll state their case and you can state your case, and you build relationships that way. I mean, I have some very good relationships with legislators years later, and some of them don't necessarily support our efforts, but they support me making the effort. And you learn that despite the differences, they're still good people in some cases, and good friends, and those relationships are important with or without their support.
I couldn't agree with you more. I actually, and this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I actually liked the meetings where I knew I was going to talk to somebody who wasn't necessarily in our corner. Because what that did was it made me think more creatively, right? Right. Okay, I know this person, like at the time it was, I know this person is not for incentives or is not for, going way back, not for the rebate coming out of the general fund. But it was trying to find those places like, okay, but are you against our industry? Do you understand the importance of diversifying our economy, and where can we work together to make sure that our industry is included, and what kinds of things could we work together on to help the industry? Would it be in the education sector? Would it be in small business development? Would it be, and those were exciting to me to think about because, at one point when we had the incentive, it wasn't just about furthering the incentive. It was what do we do to continue to grow an environment that will cultivate this industry long term and turn us into a content creation mega cluster. So those really kind of, 10, 15, 20, 30-year down-the-road discussions, to me, those discussions that you didn't just have the cheering section behind you were just so interesting. And I really like those.
And I always equate those meetings and the relationships and the conversations to a large jigsaw puzzle. And yeah. Every conversation you have, every email you read, and even getting as down to the minutia of every tweet that you read from a legislator is a piece of that puzzle that you're trying to put together and make it whole. And making it whole means growing and strengthen our industry for the long term, like you said. And every little piece of information that you can gather goes into that puzzle in trying to achieve the greater good of the whole. And so I'm with you. I enjoy the process of constantly learning and constantly trying to put all these pieces of information together.
Yeah. It's it's making the sausage in a different way.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's what makes our democracy beautiful. It's messy, and it's never linear.
Right.
But it's engaging, and I value the difference of opinion. I always kind of like a good debate. You know that about me.
Right.
Maybe more than I should. But I always like to hear a conversation, have that debate, see the other side. I think it makes us all kind of better as people when we can take a different stance or look at somebody else's viewpoint. And the experience in Film Florida really, really gave me that. It made me understand the different needs of our state and the different sections of our state, and the different interests and industries that, are kind of prevalent in our state. And it made me see how amazingly well our industry can work with pretty much all of them. Not to not to toot our own horn, but it's true. It's true.
So, Leah, when I look at your credits on IMDb, it's really impressive. And so just a couple examples, recent projects like American Crime Story and Ballers, to past projects like The Glades and Graceland, to Florida classics like Flipper, There's Something About Mary, Any Given Sunday. I mean, the list goes on and on. Whether it's one of those or a different project, what's your favorite and why?
Two really come to mind. and that's, The Glades, which was a recent television show on A&E that ran for 4 seasons, and Maximum Bob, which was a television show that ran on ABC, or it was, I think it only aired like 2 or 3 episodes. We were supposed to replace NYPD Blue when Jimmy Smits was leaving the show, and so we were given a green light for, I think it was 12 episodes, but we actually only ended up making 6 because Stephen Bochco recast the Jimmy Smits character. Rick Schroeder came on, and we lost our time slot. That was when you could actually lose your time slot, when there weren't like 500 million other places you could sell the show.
Exactly.
So again, dating myself here, but those 2 TV shows were just such amazing experiences for me. Because they weren't typical TV shows. Both of them were a different take on a Florida story. The Glades was not in a location that we would usually be shooting. We actually shoot in Broward County. We shot, I should say, in Broward County, but we were shooting Broward County as lots of different areas of Florida. And it was a funny, quirky comedy show that revolved around a murder each episode. And the crew that the producer put together was just so amazing and worked so well together. And the writers were fabulous and the actors were fabulous. And the whole vibe on the set was just so great for 4 years that when we heard we got canceled, I literally crawled into a hole, John, and I just cried for a few days. I couldn't I couldn't fathom that the show had been canceled, because there was like a 90% chance, 95% chance, we were told by our producer, that it was going to get picked up. And A&E did a programming shift. They decided to move away from scripted and go more with reality-based programming. And we got cut, and it was heartbreaking because they were like family. Maximum Bob only lasted 6 episodes, and it was kind of like that show Northern Exposure.
Okay.
But it was set down in Homestead, and it was based on an Elmore Leonard novel. This character of a hanging judge who was married to a woman who was a former Weeki-Wachi mermaid, and there were just all these wacky, crazy characters. And it just showed, up until that point in my career, I'd been working on kind of a lot of Miami Vice remakes, to put it bluntly.
Okay.
And this was something so different that just showed a different side of Florida and had this fun sense of humor. And again, the crew was just starting to gel and becoming amazing. We only had the 6 episodes. But then we got the news that NYPD Blue was continuing, and they weren't going to continue with us, and it broke my heart. So those 2 would definitely be tops. And it was mostly, I have to say, about the crews and not necessarily about the content, like just the family environment, the way we worked, the on-set camaraderies, all of that was what made those shows amazing. I mean, I love the content of both of those shows too, because they were just a little bit different from, the average stuff that I work on. But really, it was the crew and the work environment that just made those so special. Now, I would have to say the projects that I'm most proud of, recent history would be the assassination of Gianni Versace, which was the 2nd season of American Crime Story, which just aired this year, 2018, and won some Emmys. We shot that for a period of about 3 weeks on Ocean Drive.
Wow.
And I was so proud of that, because navigating the logistics of Ocean Drive, my crew did such an amazing job. They really did. I mean, I don't know if you know Ocean Drive, but it's one stretch of road, 2-lane road, going for about 10 blocks, paralleling the ocean. And it's, it can be gridlock on any given day, depending on what's going on. It's the main tourist destination in Miami Beach. And we were able to, with help of the city, tremendous help from the city, obviously, and tremendous help from the business community, basically take it over for about a 2-block stretch right in the middle of it, for almost 3 weeks.
Wow.
And it wasn't always pretty, because after 3 weeks of constant impact, obviously businesses get itchy, but my team soared through it, and what came out on camera in the final edit of Ocean Drive and then up at Ocean Terrace and some of the other little ancillary locations, it just looked so beautiful. And it just really screamed vintage Miami. And, and the story went on to win some Emmys, and very proud to have been a part of that. And on the feature side, I think my most proud achievement would be the film Any Given Sunday, which was an Oliver Stone football epic movie with Al Pacino, Dennis Quaid, Cameron Diaz, Matthew Modine, James Woods, God, many, many, many more, LL Cool J, Jamie Foxx. And I was on that project for probably about a year and a half total. And it was one of the biggest projects at the time that I think I had ever done. And it was so hard. And when it was over, so rewarding to see the scope and the magnitude of what we had accomplished, and controlling stadiums and recreating football games and recreating football teams. And I'll never forget, we were shooting at the Orange Bowl, the old Orange Bowl, before it got torn down from Marlins Stadium. I knew every single square foot of that old stadium, and we were recreating one of the football games there, and I was up in the press boxes up top just watching second unit, and I think we had something like 20,000 extras in the stands that day. And I remember just standing up there and being in awe that this was all something we created to tell a story, and just watching all the people and watching all the orchestration of the team. And it just made me realize how thankful I was to do what I do, that I get to experience these things that, other people don't get to experience, that I get to know my community in a way that most people don't know our community. It's truly been an experience and a blessing.
Those are some wonderful stories. Thank you for sharing them, because I've never heard some of those from you, and those are all great stories. That'll do it for this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Thanks to Leah Sokolowsky for joining us, and of course, thank you for listening. To learn more about the Teamsters, visit teamsterslocal769.org. And for more information about Film Florida, of course, go to filmflorida.org or visit any of our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.